Everybody, welcome to CCI Huronia's 5th webinar on COVID-19 and how to deal with this crisis in your condo. My name is Sonia Hodis and I'm one of the many directors at CCI Huronia. I'm also a condo lawyer and your moderator tonight. If you missed our first 4 webinars, you can find recordings of the past webinars on our website, ccihuronia.com, under the Resource Content tab. Who is CCI Huronia? Many of you on the call probably know about us, but in case there are people who don't know who CCI is the Canadian Condominium Institute, and we are an independent nonprofit organization that was formed in 1982. We have chapters across the country, and in Ontario we have 8 chapters alone, one of them being CCI Huronia. Our main objective is education. However, CCI also advocates for condos, and we represent all those involved in condos, from owners to directors to professionals, and we encourage all these stakeholders to work together. CCI National has also collated a bunch of resources on COVID-19, and they can be found on our national website, cci.ca, under the Resource Center tab. And if you go to the cci.ca landing page, you'll find a direct link to those COVID-19 resources. They're a great place to look for resources on COVID-19 from across the country. Also, CCI National will be hosting a condo and COVID-19 webinar on May 7th, so stay tuned for registration details. And as Ashley Lamb put in the chat box, don't forget to follow CCI Huronia on Facebook to find out about our upcoming events. So we've been living with COVID-19 for what seems like forever now. And according to the reporting out there, it seems like it's going to be still for a period of time to come. Last week, we talked a bit about various levels of government and their approach to enforcement of the emergency orders that are out there. And at first we were seeing them doing a lot of education, but now it seems like they're moving into enforcement and fines. And I just read an article about a story in Barrie where a woman was fined $750 for holding a birthday party with 6 guests plus family members. So clearly these restrictions are being enforced. One of the topics that we're going to come back to tonight that we discussed last week, which is landscaping, but we're going to take it from a different angle tonight. We're going to talk about how different municipalities are approaching enforcement. And this came up as a result of the discussion in the chat box last week when we had the session on landscaping, and there were some comments about different municipalities enforcing the essentials list differently. Also, as a follow-up to last week, Michelle Farley, who has spoken to us in the past about fire code issues, is not presenting tonight, but she did want me to pass a message on that the Toronto Fire Chief, Matthew Pegg, had tweeted that fires are up more than 17% in Toronto, and largely this is due to unattended cooking and careless smoking. And Michelle is asking everyone and reminding everyone to please check your smoke alarms and asking managers to continue to coordinate monthly and annual life safety inspections and testing. And Michelle, I know, is on the webinar. So if you have any further comments, Michelle, feel free to put them in the chat box and everyone can see them. So we come back to you again this week with another great lineup of speakers and topics. The agenda was sent out in advance. And tonight we have guests from CCI Toronto, Sue Langlois, Murray Johnson, and Bill Thompson. Thank you for joining us. It's nice to see our sister chapter being represented here tonight. We also have Evan Schulnick and Jeff Struig from the CCI Huronia Board of Directors presenting, and you can find their bios on our CCI Huronia website under the About CCI tab. We also have Jessica Laker from Bayshore Property Management joining us tonight, and she's going to be joining Jeff to discuss how the municipalities are handling landscaping issues and in interpreting the new essential services list as it relates to landscaping. And then tonight we're starting a new segment, and we're very fortunate to have Warren Broad with us. He's a life coach, therapist, and counselor, and he's going to talk to us tonight about what we can do to help ourselves if we're stuck in our units. So last but not least, we have Stephen Cassidy from CCI National tonight, and he is our national president. And Stephen's going to be saying a few words to us in a couple minutes. I just want to thank all our speakers and guests tonight. I want to thank the CCI Huronia Board of Directors for dedicating their time to put this webinar together. And just before we get started and listen to what Stephen has to say, there's a couple reminders. Please mute your phones and don't unmute yourself during the session. Also, please, if you're watching online, mute your microphone and shut off your camera. We are recording this webinar so that people who haven't been able to join us tonight can join us in the future. So we are trying to get the best recording possible, and that's why we're asking you to shut off your microphones and your cameras. If you are having any trouble during the webinar, I suggest you leave the meeting and then log back in. If you're still having trouble, the last resort would be to log in by phone. You won't be able to see us, but you will still be able to hear the content. And instructions to log in by phone were given in the confirmation that you received. In terms of questions, if you've been to any of the previous webinars, you know that we don't take questions live. However, we do use the chat function, which is on the bottom of your screen. It's a box that looks like a little bubble. You can type your questions in, and we'll do our best to try and answer them during the webinar. And if we can't, we'll try and get to them at the next webinar. Please make sure that when you do send a question, you send it to everyone so that we can all see your questions and all see the answers that are coming in response. And then finally, I'd just like to remind everybody that this webinar is providing information and thoughts about issues surrounding COVID-19 in condos. It is not providing professional advice. And so we are reminding people to contact your professionals. They are still working and they're still happy to hear from you, and that the information you're being provided today is general information and is not necessarily related to your specific fact situation. And that's why it's important that you contact your own professional to discuss your specific fact situation and what you should do. If you are a director and you want to use the protection of Section 37 of the Act, you do need to get an opinion about your specific fact situation from your professional, and this webinar is not a replacement for that opinion. In addition, the information provided in this webinar is current as of today, which is April 21st, 2020. As we've seen over the last couple of things change rapidly, and as such, the information provided today may not be relevant or applicable at a future date. And also, please be advised, if you're watching this webinar and you're outside of Ontario, all references to legislation are Ontario legislation, and references to the Condo Act is referring to the Ontario Condo Act. So without further ado, let's get started. And Stephen Cassidy, our fearless leader, our CCI National President, what would you like to tell our participants today?
Hi, so I'm Stephen Cassidy. I'm the National President for CCI. I want to start with a story I heard from Jim Allison, a property manager in BC and past national executive. One of the buildings that Jim manages as part of his portfolio is a seniors complex. It's a tower and there's 4 floors per floor. And the nicest thing about this story is that since social distancing has existed, there's a floor where the 4 ladies who used to always share dinner with each other now pull up their tables to their front door. They open the door and they all get to see each other because of the way the building's set up, and they continue to have their dinners together but socially distanced in the building, and to continue to have that concept of personal touch and relationship. There's a reason why I started with that story, and that's that everything we do in every opportunity, every challenge, there is a way to cope. There is a way to try to make things better given whatever the circumstances are. And that's the same thing with the volunteers here that you're seeing tonight. Our volunteers with CCI Huronia in Ontario, all the way across this country, are doing what they can. It is, and I am blown away by this. So it is substantial. It is phenomenal, the material that they're producing. I just want to highlight some of the things in Ontario that have been done specifically, and that is some huge amount of legislative advocacy that have been sent to both at the municipal and the provincial and the federal level of looking at how to make essential services, how to deal with reserves, how to deal with shortages, how to make changes for the care and control of your buildings and your properties. Our Ontario Legislative Committee has been phenomenal in taking action. Each of the chapters, Huronia included, for posting information and materials to the Resource Center that Sonia talked about. Seminars like this haven't stopped. In fact, they've increased, including the training. And they are heavily working on forecasting what would happen as this virus continues to exist for the next week or month or however long it may take to come under control, and building up materials and responses and advocacy and training already for that. It is, at the last tally, there has been literally several thousand hours that have been provided by CCI volunteers across this country, and especially here in Ontario. And so thank you on the webinar, because you're why we're here. You're why people are taking time out of their professional and their family lives to make sure that their own volunteer spirit continues to strive. And that's why I'd like to say thank you to Warren and Sue and Murray, who you're going to hear from, and Bill, Debbie, Joanna, Jeff, Evan, Jessica, Patricia. I hope I'm not missing anybody who's speaking tonight. Even with their life and their family, friends, there are people in this organization and just in Canada in general who have such an amazing, vibrant commitment to volunteerism and making other people's lives better. And it is so nice to be part of an organization that sits there and says, how can we continue to provide what we need? Also, I want to bring a shout out to Sonia, who's chairing tonight's meeting. It is not without a substantial concept to say that Sonia's efforts, because she's also helping building some national seminars as well online and with other chapters, has been very helpful, and your time is really highly appreciated. And so that's the whole point. Volunteerism and everything that you do. Sure, this is a webinar that's being provided by CCI, but don't forget to take that home and with your neighbors as much as you can have. This is a thing about people and closeness and still needing that human support and touch. And so just like the four ladies who have dinner together, even though they have to social distance, this is all about how we as individuals and as part of a community volunteer and help and assist with each other. So it must remain personal. This must remain a familiar concept even in this time. So that's the message, by the way, that we're giving CCI, and everybody's picking up on it. It's that, you know, we have something new. Why don't we go after it? And remember, we're all about people. So I appreciate your participation here. Yeah, I know that even in a time of pandemic, which I don't think I still understand or cope with just how all encompassing this is. So your thanks. And if you have any desire to help or volunteer or support, CCI is pushing everything we can, and we could always use more people to participate. So how I close most things lately is this. I hope you are healthy and hale. And I hope you're healthy and hale as best can be, as given the circumstances. Sonia, thank you for the time. And I look forward to watching the rest of the webinar with everybody.
Stephen, thanks for joining us. All right, so let's move on. We've talked in the past about communication and what we should be communicating to our condo residents and to people that we work with, or contractors that are coming on, or visitors that are coming onto the property. So tonight we thought we would invite Sue Langlois from DigiNotice and from our CCI Toronto chapter to talk to us about a better way to actually communicate these messages. Sue, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining the webinar tonight. You know, it's funny with since COVID-19 hit, it has been crazy busy with notices that we've been doing at DigiNotice. I think, you know, certainly having a screen in an elevator or a lobby or something like that has been a big help to a lot of condos, because they can be changed remotely. The messaging can be done remotely, which is very helpful. It's funny because I always go on and on about, you know, the importance of a communication campaign and a plan, a strategy for condos. Back in February, when we first sort of heard about coronavirus, we didn't even know it was called COVID-19 at the time, I think. We were running a flu campaign, and normally we would do this back in November, you know, reminding people how to stay healthy, to wash their hands, do that kind of thing. And so for the whole month of February, we were telling people, you know, wash your hands, stay healthy. Here's coronavirus. I think there was one case in the country at that time. We were doing a whole bunch of facts on coronavirus, letting people know that it was similar to SARS, what the symptoms were, that sort of thing. So by the end of February, I was kind of thinking, oh, people must be sick and tired about hearing about coronavirus and flu. In fact, I had some people going, okay, enough on the flu stuff already, ending the end of February. And then whammo, mid-March, we got to the time when everybody had to social distance and everything else. So back it all went. Everything that had come down at the end of February, it went way back up in spades, and it never stopped. And I think one of the first things we learned about communication-wise is that it's such a you can't get people to drink through a fire hose. So first of all, it was tell everyone to keep calm. And I think, you know, Sonia, you have a slide there that shows that. We had a little bit of sense of humor in it. I think it's the third slide in. So first off, we told people, keep calm and wash your hands. So right off the bat, you know, people got a little bit of a chuckle out of that. But it focused on the number one, keep calm, number two, wash your hands. And then we started to sort of disseminate the information in bits and pieces, because what we saw coming through from most condo management was an entire huge document full of a million different things. So we tried to break that down, letting people know, you know, what the different rules were. I think right off the bat, amenities being closed. That was one thing all on its own. Everybody, amenities are closed. Social distancing became a reality. So, you know, keep 6 feet, 2 meters apart, letting people know that in a short burst of information. They didn't have to do a lot of reading. It's just boom in their face. They could see. I think letting people know that deliveries, that was the latest thing. So food deliveries was a big deal. It started out that they were delivering to the doorways of the units. Some condos were saying, nope, we can't deliver to any units unless you're ill or self-isolating. So they pulled it back to, you know, come on down to the lobby. So letting people know the changes, everything that's happening as it's happening, and changing up the notices constantly, but in short little pieces, let people, you know, sort of absorb the information a lot easier. And elevator distancing was also a big one, as like that evolved as time went by. You know, 2 people per elevator or 1 family per elevator sort of thing. And then a little bit later, we saw it evolve to getting a little bit tougher. So some people weren't taking it seriously. There were still people meeting, hanging out in the lobbies and meeting up when they shouldn't be meeting up. So as soon as it became mandatory that you had to isolate if you were out of the country, especially that sort of thing. So here's the sort of notice that we put up right off the bat, let people know, okay, guys, things are getting serious. So that there was an evolution for sure of communication from the start until to date. And then, you know, non-essential visitors, that also became kind of a hot topic there. In some condos, they literally were banning anybody. If you didn't live there, you couldn't come into the building. And that's all there was to it. So letting people know that this is serious and people have to take it seriously. And when your communications are reflective of that, I think people actually do get the message, and they do start taking it seriously. Now, that's not to say that we can't have some humor involved. I mean, we are all in this together. And certainly St. Patrick's Day, and that's really when all the social isolation, I know I'm a big fan of St. Patrick's Day myself, and I missed it this year. So, but this is a way that we kind of said, you know what, we're acknowledging the day, maybe make a little joke, and everybody gets through it a little bit more together. There's certainly, this is another example of how you can use some humor, you know, elbow the buttons, not your neighbor. Certainly we were reminding, there's a practical reason for messages like this as well. You don't want people jabbing at the buttons with their keys or umbrellas or anything else. They can damage buttons. And this one was one that we used that people are like, you know what, you're fine. In this building, there's a lot of older people, and they thought, you know what, everybody's going to feel better if everyone wears a mask. So your culture in your building is going to set the tone for some of your notices. Not all buildings follow the same sort of rules, but certainly once a board of directors and management team come together and decide, you know, the policies that they want to do, the tone that they want to set, creating a sort of communication strategy helps with that, sets the tone and carries you through until we're all better. This is something here, again, so it's not all doom and gloom. Keep people amused, keep them busy. We sort of thought, you know what, everybody's sitting at home, I don't know about your microwaves, but mine certainly could do with a little scrub. So anyway, it was just an example of, you know what, we put together a series. I think there was 8 or 10 different notices that lets people know here's something you can do while you're bored at home. And certainly, you know, if there's apps, there's tons of apps. I know House Party's one. There's lots of different apps. This one was one that lets you know waiting times at different stores. And especially if someone from the community shared this information, we had some buildings that were like, hey, thanks, John, for the tip on the cool tool. So it sort of brings the community together if you can put the people into the messaging as well. So, and one thing I forgot as well is to thank everyone. We've been doing a lot of notices like that say thank you to the community, thanks to the frontline staff, certainly the people who are cleaning the building, the people who are still working in the building, the managers, all that sort of thing. So it's important to make sure that your communication strategy includes a big fat thank you to all those who are working the front lines.
And a big fat thank you to you, Sue.
Oh.
For sharing these with us. And I just want to point out, there was a question that came up in the chat about how these notices would be helpful. If you go to Sue's website, diginotice.com, she does have some posters that you can download for free on the website. So check that out, and you can pick up some of these there. And it's important, I think, in terms of your message, Sue, is that the information is short, but there's also a lot of graphics and pictures that grab people's attention, which may make them actually pay attention to what you have to say. So thanks a lot for sharing a better way to communicate with our residents and people coming onto the properties.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to move on to our next speaker, Murray Johnson. And if you've watched any of the CCI Toronto videos, you know Murray, he is your condo connection. And I'm going to get Murray to maybe do that for us at the end of his presentation today. But Murray's going to talk about the role of the management company, the role of the manager, and the role of the condo director during COVID. So Murray, what do you think everybody's role is?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me here tonight. Listen, I'm gonna really speak to people that aren't in the management company, aren't a manager, or aren't a director, because I think you need to know what the other people are going through. You know, when we talk about management companies, we've had to learn to practice this delicate balance between employment standards, occupational health and safety, and our fiduciary obligation to our clients. And they don't always blend that easily, but for the most part, the management companies are working through that. We've had to learn how to do our work remotely. And we've always had this opinion that you had to be on site really to do a good job. Whether you're fully remote or part-time, like many of us, as a management company, we've had to build in accountability and processes for our staff. Most of you are probably aware that the offices are closed, and that's a mandate most of the companies have put in place to protect our staff. There's social distancing. Even if we have more than one on site, if they can't social distance, then one of them's going home and working from there. The interesting thing about what we've seen lately is we've had to improve our communications. We're not just communicating with our managers anymore, certainly with our field staff, with our head office staff, but we're also communicating much more with our client boards. And that's been real important. And that sort of plays on the communication aspect that Sue talked about. Going from the management firm out into the field then, that balance is still there. It's slightly different though, in that managers have to have that balance of working remotely and working at the site. And we've really had to dig down deep and say, do you really have to be at the site during this pandemic? What we have been telling our managers is when you go to the site, you have to plan your visit, go in, make the best of it. Try not to interact with too many people, but it's important that the staff, the frontline staff, the cleaners, and the security that have to be there all the time, see you as the leader, as the manager on the site from time to time. So it can't be 100% away. But we still have other things that we have to do there. Some inspections, certainly pick up mail, get checks signed and things like that, all that life safety. All of that is still business as usual, but delivered in a slightly different way. During these times, life safety and occupational health and safety are front and center. It's really critical now, and I think the managers have to, when they're on site, lead by example. And you certainly have to look for people that aren't following COVID protocols and make a point of letting them know that they're doing it incorrectly. The manager, like the management firm, has this tremendous need for constant communication back to their employer, communication to the board, and certainly to the residents and the service providers that come on site. And what we've been seeing is that the managers are spending a considerable amount of time disseminating information and rolling it out to their communities. Then we go into the community and we look at directors and the boards. I guess speaking as a manager and a little bit selfish here, this new Zoom meeting and virtual meeting is really forcing directors now to open up their packages and read that information before they join the meeting. It's almost forced on them. We've had to, and certainly if you look at the color of my beard there, I've had to learn about Zoom and GoToMeeting and all sorts of other virtual tools. And that might be a side benefit of this whole thing, is that we're sort of forced now to come into modern times. We are asking the boards, and we're reminding them, and they're taking this very well, to put off the in-person meetings, the AGMs, board meetings, town hall meetings. A little bit of difficulty still getting them to try and stay away from the office and want to come in and talk to us, but a closed door does wonders there. Boards really have to start thinking about where we are today. If this continues the way it's going, are planting flowers really essential to the safe operation of the building? Get used to maybe getting the windows washed a little bit later. And for now, don't even think about spring power washing in your underground garages. You're going to have everybody coming down the elevators, and we can't do that. The one message I really want to get out to directors, though, is to avoid short-term financial restructuring. It's too early. We're hearing comments about let's forgive a month. We're hearing comments about liens and things like that. And I think it's well intended. You want to look after the people who may be having financial difficulties. But remember this, that a budget is a disclosure document. And if you're going to change the fee structure, you have to reintroduce a new disclosure document. And there's a lot to that, and it's going to take a little while. We've been learning lately from almost every blog from a lawyer's office, you can't avoid the lien process. And you have to be careful how you redirect your reserve funds. Please don't think short term, think long term. You don't want to push off because people are having difficulty with their revenue and their income. You don't want to push it off and hit them with a bigger bang at the end of all of this. Two more comments to make. One is that you've heard that the management company is getting involved with more communication, and the managers with more communication. You're the elected representatives of your constituents. They need to hear from you. They need to understand that you're on top of this and you understand what's going on. Finally, one comment to everybody out there. If you're in the start of your career, the middle of your career, and I've said this before, it's the way you conduct yourself today in the middle of this pandemic that will set your reputation for the rest of your career. Are you a good neighbor? Are you a good manager? Are you a good administrator? This is where it hits the road. This is where you get to make your reputation. Thanks, Sonia.
Thanks, Murray. Can you give us one of those, your condo connection?
Sure. Until next time, I'm Murray Johnson, and this has been your Condo Connection.
Thanks, Murray. All right, so we're going to move on to Bill Thompson, who is also a property manager and owner of Malvern Property Management. He is past president of CCI National. I've had the great pleasure of sitting with him on National Executive. He's also he was the national representative for the CCI Huronia chapter when he was on Executive, and there's probably not very many positions within CCI that Bill has not fulfilled at some point or another. So Bill, I'm going to pass it on to you, and can you give us your perspective as one of the people on the front line?
Sure, I'd love to. I'm actually going to go counter to what Murray's talking about. Many managers are doing things that I would consider not appropriate in a pandemic. Let's start at the beginning and look at what the essential services definition is. There's a precursor on the bill that says that the shutdown of business does not preclude the provision of work and services by entities not on the list or by telephone or mail delivery. So everything that you can do that's not in person is sort of permitted. So when you work back to a property manager, property managers fall into the essential service. They fall under the maintenance section, and it says maintenance, repair, and property management services strictly necessary to manage and maintain the safety, security, sanitation, and essential operation of institutional, commercial, industrial, or residential properties and buildings is permitted. And the two qualifiers in there are strictly and essential. So what have we done as an industry? We say, well, we're responsible to look after our employees. So we have to give them segregation from the public. So let's lock the management office doors. Let's have them work more online. Let's have them communicate electronically. Let's have them do every inspection or every essential service as remotely as possible. And let's avoid contact with our clients, our boards, etc. So that's a pure protection. That's straightforward. It's all the best guidelines that the Ontario and federal governments have given us, and we've implemented them into policies. And I think every management company will find that they've done the same thing. Then the manager on site gets a knock on the door. Do they open it? Murray would say, what your future is going to be, how you're going to establish yourself, will decide how you act in this scenario. I say the exact same thing. The Ontario is in a very unique position in the management industry right now. There are not enough managers. There are no spares. You can't bring people who are marginally able to do it from another country and let them come in like they've done in healthcare, like they've done in other areas like transportation, et cetera, where there's a need. We have X number of managers and not X plus one. So when a manager goes down, that building goes down. There's no coverage left. So we can't afford to risk our managers. We have to insist that they follow the protocols. It goes on further, and it says restricting access to business and providing alternative methods of sale. It talks about the fact that you can continue to do that as long as it's a drop and go or a non-contact. So you can still sell remotes, you can still make keys available, you can do all of those sorts of things through a drop system. So in our office, for instance, we have we call it the cooling off tray. No paperwork comes in our office and gets handled right away. We sit it in a tray and it gets processed the next day. That way it's clean. We don't have to disinfect paper. 24 hours later, it's clean and clear. The same thing should happen on site, but managers are always trying to step up and do more and do more and do more. So they're going to people's units in non-emergency situations because they think that the customer service is more important than their own self-protection. Well, guess what? If that manager has COVID-19 and doesn't have symptoms, they'll pass it on to 100 residents in their building. The same people they're trying to protect, they will be harming. So I am really, really strongly of the belief that managers need to figure out how to do their job without contact. And they need to figure out where that line is between essential and strictly needed versus nice to do. And boards and owners need to understand the position that the manager is in because they're only permitted to do those things that are essential and strictly necessary for the safety and security of the building. So like Murray said, if you're going to plant flowers, well, guess what? That's not strictly needed. It's nice. The owners would like it. It would make the whole neighborhood feel better, but you can't do it. So the manager is in the middle now and being forced to be pushed into places that they don't want to be. And in the end, who's going to be responsible for that? is going to be the employer who is responsible under employment standards for the safety and security of their employees. So you, as a management company, if there's any management companies here, are setting all these guidelines, but if we're not finding ways to ensure they're being enforced, then we're still online for this. So boards, homeowners, all need to understand that the manager does need to be isolated, except in what I would consider an emergency. And even in an emergency, if you had a plumbing problem, your superintendent shuts off the riser, the plumber comes in and inspects it. He's got full hazmat gear on when he goes into the unit. The manager can look on the plumber's phone, they can send pictures and give authorization to go ahead. The manager doesn't have to attend that unit. I think managers, if they're going to be smart and they're going to survive this and they're going to thrive in it, have to find ways to do everything as remotely as possible. Murray touched on the fact that we have been forced to take on technology. Many management companies have tried for years to try and get remote meetings, electronic meetings, etc. And there's been huge resistance from the graybeard guys like Murray. But now people have to do it because they have to do some business. So I think for every time there is a really bad situation, there is a silver lining to it. And I think from a management perspective, the silver lining we have here is that we can force the moving forward of electronic meetings. We may be able to get managers to get a few nights back when this is all over because they can meet through the day electronically. So if you have the ability as a manager, as a director, or as an owner to protect those people on your site, to keep the manager segregated, please do so. That's my rant.
Thanks, Bill. It's an interesting perspective because we talk about a lot of essential services and, we naturally go to the doctors and the nurses and those people. And we forget that, in condo land, one of the most essential services that we have are the managers and the people that are still working in the buildings, trying to keep everything running. And we really do need to keep everybody safe. So thanks for sharing your views on that.
Sonia, I think just to close it, I think I just have to say that you have to remember that managers are not trained in healthcare. They don't have all the protocols down. They're the same as everybody else walking through the building. So they can't take on that role.
That's a good point. That's a good point. We were talking about how condos shouldn't be taking on that role. And that's a good point that managers also should not be taking on that role. All right, so switching gears, we're now going to come back to the topic of landscaping and talk about what we are experiencing in various jurisdictions within Huronia. And tonight to talk about that, we have three property managers. We have Jeff Strurig from Shore to Slope, and we have Jessica Laker from Bayshore Property Management, and Debbie Dale from MCRS Property Management was going to speak tonight, but she had an emergency with a flood that came up late this afternoon. So she just asked that I pass on some information with respect to the situation in Huntsville, which is where she primarily works out of. And she tells us that in terms of the bylaw officers in Huntsville, and how they're dealing with the definitions under essential services when it comes to landscaping. She's basically saying it's all over the place, even between bylaw officers within the same bylaw office. And that pretty well, any kind of enforcement is driven by complaints. So if the bylaw office is not receiving a complaint, then they're not going out to enforce issues with essential services at this time. She also wanted me to let people know that at least in Huntsville, right now, they are using the right to preserve property and assets to be able to cut the grass about once a week to maintain the lawns. They've also are watering and turned on the irrigation systems, and that they are doing the spring cleanups, but they are not planting in the gardens, although they are taking out the dead material from the garden beds to avoid pests. The other thing that they're doing is making sure that the lawns are cut so that it'll prevent falls when we have high growing grass and ticks. And I think that was a question that came up in one of the chat comments about ticks and lawns. And that's something that's one of the reasons why they are doing lawn cutting once a week. The other thing that she wanted to mention was that they are doing the cleanup the grounds clean up, especially in the asphalt areas, to prevent slip and falls, making sure that all the salt and the sand that's there is being cleaned up so people aren't falling. And that seems to be the situation in Huntsville. So Jeff, I'm going to pass it off to you. Can you tell us what's happening in Collingwood?
Sure. So Collingwood's actually probably one of the more organized, and the head of bylaw has responded to us in writing and provided guidelines. They'll allow the basic grass cutting and cleanup of the property, sanitation and security, of course. No to planting new gardens or non-essential items. They ask that the landscapers maintain physical distancing. They don't want to see more than 2 in a vehicle, and so on. A little further to the west in the Blue Mountains, which also includes Thornbury. They're all over the map like Huntsville. Each bylaw officer has a different approach, but it is completely complaint driven. They're not doing any patrols like Collingwood is doing. It's respond to complaints, and it's issue a warning on at least the first offense, if not second offense, and only planning on issuing tickets if there's a significant breach in physical distancing or non-essential work taking place. As of yesterday, they had not laid a single fine. So, and we do see work taking place throughout the Blue Mountains. So.
Thanks, Jeff. Jessica, you've got an interesting perspective because you've got some perspective from Barrie, but also from Alliston. So can you let us know what's happening in those communities with respect to landscaping and enforcement?
Sure. So it's covering Simcoe County. And when a couple weeks back, the essential services list got changed, it kind of set us in a little bit of panic, knowing that April 15th, usually our landscaping starts in the communities. I happen to oversee and manage in a community that landscaping is the highlight of the people's day there. They are adult lifestyle and landscaping is very exciting, and lots of calls started to come in. So I dealt a lot with the contractors, with the landscape companies, asking them the legwork they were doing, the investigations, because Section 20 of maintenance was not clear. There was a lot of ambiguity around it, and nobody could really give a solid answer. We had landscapers calling the number, sitting on lines for 2.5 hours and waiting, and they still said at the end of the day, sorry, we don't know. So as somebody else mentioned before, bylaw was another avenue to go to, and I started going to them myself. And we have emails back from Alliston, Barrie, saying they view landscaping as an essential service. They don't actually break it down and talk about grass cutting versus fertilizing versus this or that, but they talk more about the protocol and that everybody is adhering to the COVID-19 protocol. So you're distancing, you're 6 feet away from each other, be traveling in the vehicles. That kind of was more of their concerns. The way we have addressed it in some of the communities is allowing the landscaping to go on based on our, some legal opinions and the bylaw, and just informing the residents of the services. And what I have said to everybody is, this is our new normal right now. And it's not going to look the same as last year. And your landscaping is not going to be everything it was before. So please be patient. There's a lot of issues even with people aren't remembering that the landscaping crews on site, if they're in townhouses as opposed to buildings or even buildings, where are they using washrooms right now? Your local Tim Hortons is closed. So there's a lot that you have to factor in now. So I was covering off on the services that were being provided, which yes, grass cutting, pruning, general safety, sanitation. There's some interesting perspectives on irrigation. We've had a few different emails back where some irrigation companies sought bylaw and they said, yes, irrigation was allowed. We've had some other opinions that irrigation, it's not so necessary at the moment. Turf management is another one. So with fertilizing, weed control, all of those things, the companies are saying, yes, we're allowed to get out there. And we have opinions where they're saying, no, I'm sorry, fertilizing isn't essential at the moment. So there still is some mixed opinions out there, but for the most part, I think across the board now, people are generally doing the grass cutting and the general maintenance. And we are really working with our residents too to have them adhere just as much as the landscapers have to adhere, and the contractors in the community, that we don't want them walking up to the landscapers. You have to respect, you know, what they are doing as well as they are there. And the owners of the companies that I've been speaking to have been very good about wanting to protect their employees. Bill touched on that a little bit as well. And, you know, that is really important. And I'm expressing that in the communities, that please, we have to think about the workers that are coming in here as well. They have families at home. We're worried about their safety. So landscaping has definitely been an exciting topic in all the regions, but in Simcoe County, the basic services are going on, and anything else we are talking about just delaying until we hear more about what's going to happen in the future after May 12th, when the next emergency order is up. We don't know what comes next. So that's Simcoe County for you, Alliston and Barrie at the moment.
Thanks, Jessica. There was a question that came in about outdoor sprinklers and irrigation systems. Debbie, in the email she sent to me, she noted that in Huntsville, opening up the irrigation systems was part of what was going on and continuing. Jessica, what are you experiencing in terms of irrigation and that? Are you guys opening up irrigation systems?
Well, in the community I am in, we have a residential servicing organization. So they take care of the golf course and the whole area, and they are still mixed. They are seeking legal opinions. We have a couple of sites that I know of that have said that they are proceeding with their irrigation because if there is leaking in the system, they want to get it started up so that when it is ready, they don't just want to leave it and not turn it on for the season. So some are preparing it. Are the repairs and maintenance important right now? They are. So again, a little bit of mixed opinion on the irrigation. And for our community, I'm not quite sure yet. An interesting one about turf management and grass is because I'm in a golf course community, they did get an opinion and called the province asking about maintaining the golf course. And they're deeming that as essential right now, because for their business later, that it would be a problem. So people in the community are complaining that, you know, we can't fertilize, but yet they can take care of the golf course. So there's so many things across the board that people don't understand what's deemed as essential or not. And it's about constant communication and trying to explain it.
Jeff, what is the experience you're having in Collingwood with irrigation?
Yeah, so irrigation both in Collingwood and Town of the Blue Mountains requires a town water inspector to attend when it's engaged for the season. They inspect the meter and backflow prevention device to make sure they're functional. They are not booking appointments to do so right now, citing COVID-19 and non-essential service. So we've been trying to book them for May, and they're not even accepting appointments at this point. I just want to touch on something Jessica brought up, and it's a reality, at least in these municipalities where they're limiting to landscape contractors to a service vehicle that might normally carry 6 guys to the site. And because of the physical distancing, it is going to take a lot longer to bring sites back to where they should be with the limited staff on site and the limited transportation.
Thanks, Jeff. It's too bad we can't get more clarity from the province to try and answer some of these questions in terms, especially in terms of landscaping that everybody's having right now, because it's such a pressing issue. We talked in a couple of webinars ago, we talked about making sure you're creating documentation, especially when you're going to make the decision that something is essential. And Evan Schulnick is going to talk to us tonight about what we're deeming the deemed essential letter. Something that he's been doing and experiencing, is just going to share that experience with the rest of you as a way to document how you're coming to decisions about what is essential. Evan?
Hi, thanks, Sonia. Yeah, first of all, there's a lot of gray areas on what's deemed essential and what's not essential. We're falling under Section 10 and Section 20 of the essential list by the province in the maintenance and the construction. But there's still, like Bill had said, and a number of people touched on, lots of gray areas. So how do we protect ourselves? And a couple of weeks ago, we were doing work with a property management firm that manages some of the provincial assets. And we were given a letter to carry around that it says we're working for, as a supplier, as a vendor for an essential service, and thus the person carrying the letter is deemed essential. And it goes on to say, you know, what the project is, and then it's signed by both parties, both myself as the engineering firm, and then the client, and it's issued by the client. And I thought it was a good way to provide, again, as Sonia said, documentation that the decision was made, and it was made, you know, in looking at all the factors and trying to be reasonable. You know, a letter's not going to save you if you're not social distancing, or if you're not following the protocols that are put in place. But while we are dealing with this gray area, why not document that sound minds came together and deemed that this project needed to go ahead, and so the people who are working on it have that. You know, I don't know if it will save us getting a ticket, or at the end of the day, if the projects that our clients are having us work on will be deemed essential or not essential, but it's acting reasonably, and we can show that we're acting reasonably. I think you know, it's on all of us working together for the condominium to determine whether or not that project should go ahead, and not a single voice. And so this just is a mechanism to help that.
Thanks, Evan. Can you just give us like a brief outline of sort of what that letter touches on? Not all the details of the letter, but sort of what are the topics that letter covers?
So it's not extensive. It first states who it's being issued by, and so in this case, it's the property manager on behalf of the provincial government. And so for us, it's issued by the condominium that we're working on, for the engineering, for us, the engineers, and they do the same for the contractor. It's just states that you know, the client or the condominium and the property management managing that condominium is deemed essential, and that us servicing that property manager, we are also covered under that essential order. In the provincial one, it doesn't specifically mention the projects, but I've added that in. I think it's important, you know, consideration. And then it just references the different sections of the orders from the government, from the essential service list, and sections 10 and 20 where they deem. That's really it. But you know, when we take a look at starting a brand new project, and does that project meet the requirements to be deemed essential? I mean, I didn't anticipate talking about this. I know we've talked about getting some more municipalities and how they're determining whether something's essential or not, and outside of the landscaping. I kind of wanted to keep that from another time. This is just a way to prove that sound minds came together, and it wasn't just, well, I need the revenue, so I want to continue and deem my project essential, or I want my roofing project to go ahead. So you know, obviously roofs are essential. It's well, you know, what's going on with your particular roof? How is it going to be impacted if we wait from now to later? You know, those discussions and meeting with your contractors and engineers, and even you know, your solicitors to make sure that you've got yourself covered. The letter then acts as a way to document that.
Thanks, Evan. And I think it's been brought up in some of our previous webinars, and I saw a comment from Patricia in the chat box too about getting legal opinions to protect yourself. But don't forget to also document this in your minutes, so that it clearly shows that the board has put consideration to it. Thanks, Evan. So our last speaker tonight is new to Condo land, and we may be able to convert him into a CCI member shortly. But we're very lucky tonight to have Warren Broad with us, and he's going to provide us some insight on how we deal with stain in our unit. Warren?
Thanks so much, Sonia. I apologize, I'm kind of fading into the background here. But very briefly, one of the things in mental health that I'm having a conversation with many clients on a daily basis right now is regarding how do we maintain purpose in isolation. And one of the best ways to look at this is from a structure of what we call the pillars of life. So we as human beings are all supported by three main factors in our lives. What are we doing to maintain our physical health? what are we doing to maintain our mental health? And what are we doing to maintain our spiritual health? And spiritual can get into a bit of gray area because for some people that may be a church and God approach. For other people, spirituality falls into a slightly different realm. But while we're in isolation and while we have a lot more time on our hands than what we might have previously had, a way to structure our days so that they aren't quite as random of just trying to search for what we might focus on that day is to look at life from this daily approach of mental, physical, spiritual. And these tasks do not need to be large at any level. So thinking to ourselves on a daily basis, our mental pillar is what we are learning. The human brain loves to learn, not necessarily structured learning like we were in high school or grade school, but we do love to learn. It's an aspect of the human mind. It's why isolation can be as challenging as it is we don't tend to learn much in isolation. We're worldly human beings and we learn by experience. But luckily we do have the internet and we do have all sorts of sources for expanding knowledge. So what we have to do is think to ourselves, what do I want to expand my mind on today? And it can be as simple as a new baking technique. It could be a new sewing technique. It could be learning a little bit more about World War II history. It really doesn't matter what the content is. What matters is that we were disciplined enough to spend a period of time, could be as short as 15 minutes, could be as long as an hour or two, in expanding our knowledge in a certain area. So that would be our mental pillar. Our physical pillar is straightforward in what do we do for our bodies? The body itself also needs movement. And for many of your condo residents, especially if they're in deep levels of isolation, they may not be leaving their residence at all. The great thing that COVID has brought forward is that many of our personal trainers, many of our gyms, YouTube has incredible amounts of free content on how to get exercise at whatever level you're at. Even somebody who's wheelchair bound can find a workout that allows their body to move a little bit, which produces endorphins. Anytime we increase our heart rate, we begin to produce endorphins, which are the happy chemicals that maintain mental health. Lastly would be our spiritual pillar. And spiritual is any kind of content or any kind of process that gives us a sense of fulfillment. This can be a little bit challenging. I'm in Huntsville. Many people find that through nature up here. But even watching a YouTube video of canoeing, we've actually done studies on this, that the watching of a process of watching somebody go for a hike, to the mind, the imagination can still experience connection in that to the activity. Not quite the same, of course, as being able to actually go out, but we need to think on a regular basis, how do I achieve this? And nobody's necessarily going to achieve this on a daily basis, that they're going to complete all three pillars every day. The important piece is maintaining discipline around getting those sources fed on a daily basis, and or at least on a weekly basis, so that we can maintain meaning and purpose. This is the biggest thing that brings in anxiety and depression, is lack of meaning, lack of purpose. And when we're in isolation, those are one of the first things that tend to drop off. So maintaining these pillars is really one of the easiest ways to keep something simple in mind that allows us to then fulfill on those actions. And I could go into much more depth, but I think we'll leave it with that.
Thanks, Warren. I know from our conversation that we had getting ready for tonight's webinar, two things I've done. I've started to implement a schedule for me and the rest of my family. And I started hitting all the zoos and aquariums, their websites, because a lot of them have live webcams of the animals, and it's
absolutely,
and of the fish tanks, and which can be quite interesting and relaxing all at the same time. So
Yeah,
thanks.
and the art galleries are doing similar virtual tours where you can do a virtual tour for an hour of an art gallery in Paris, and these things actually are quite fulfilling to our intellect, which is one of the big things that's suffering. If somebody spends 3 hours on Netflix, their intellect got nothing. And you know, it was a distraction. It felt fine perhaps during that distracted time, but they don't necessarily feel much fulfillment from that.
Exactly. And I think CBC is putting some of the Stratford plays on that you can actually watch them online. So there's lots of opportunity online to engage yourself. Thanks, Warren. And thanks for providing that insight to our discussions. And we're going to be continuing with the sort of mental health segments for the next couple of weeks. We've got a bunch of speakers lined up to talk to us about how to improve our mental health and maintain our mental health during the COVID crisis from a variety of different perspectives. So thanks again, Warren. All right, well, I'm happy to say that tonight we were able to keep everyone on time, and it's 8:02, and we've come to the end of tonight's webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us. And if you have any questions that you want answered that we haven't been able to get to tonight, please send them to admin@ccihuronia.com. We'll try and reach them at our next session. If you've put them in the post, you don't need to send them again to us. We will be taking a look at the questions that have been put in the post to make sure that we have captured the answers to them. Also, we are still trying to collect tips and tricks to survive COVID-19. Warren gave us a couple good ones tonight that we'll be adding to our list. Please send your tips and tricks into admin@ccihuronia.com. Please acknowledge where those tips and tricks are coming from. And once we collect a bunch of them, we will be distributing them at a later date. Don't forget that tonight's webinar has been recorded, and hopefully it will be on our website within the next 48 hours. So if you want to watch it again, or if you know someone who's missed it and would appreciate the information, please let them know that they can get that on our website within the next couple days. I wanted to give a shout out to a couple of CCI chapters that are hosting webinars over the next couple of weeks. CCI South Alberta is hosting a webinar this week on April 23rd on condos and COVID-19. CCI North Alberta is hosting a town hall COVID-19 and condos on April 28th. You can register on their website, so ccisusouthalberta.com or ccinoर्थalberta.com. Our friends in Eastern Ontario, they are holding a webinar that has nothing to do with COVID. It's called There Are No Stupid Questions and Virtual Beer. And that's going to be on April 30th. I know they've hosted these events live in the past and they've been very popular. They're going to do it by webinar this time. So don't forget, if you're interested, it is open to members and non-members of CCI Eastern Ontario. You can go to their website, cci-easternontario.ca. Also, CCI Toronto is hosting a webinar on April 30th, looking past the problem of mental health, and you can go to the ccitoronto.org website to register. And finally, Golden Horseshoe is having a webinar on May 6th, condominium contractors in COVID, and you can register for that webinar at cci-ghc.ca. And I think John has been so kind to post these up in the chat box for you as well. And don't forget that CCI National will be hosting a condos and COVID-19 webinar on May 7th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. There are going to be speakers from across Canada. We're going to be getting perspectives on how condos are dealing with COVID-19 from various provinces. Registration will be available soon on the national website, which is cci.ca. Thanks again to all of our speakers. Our next webinar is on April 28th, which is next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. If you'll need to register again for that webinar, and an e-blast will go out shortly. If you don't get the e-blast and you're not on our list, join the list, and also go to our website and you can register directly from our website. Until next time, I'm Sonia Hodis, and I ask you to be safe, be patient, be kind, and please stay home. Do your part to protect the essential workers that are still putting their lives on the line to protect and help all of us get through this situation, as well as those that are medically compromised. Please stay in your home, stay in your unit unless it's essential to go out. This is something that we can all do to help flatten the curve so that all of us can eventually return to work, return to schools, and be able to use our recreational facilities again. From the CCI family to your family, wishing you a good night and a good week, and we'll see you next week on April 28th. Good night, everyone.